Hi everyone, sorry to interrupt your conversations. For once you are allowed to drink in the galleries, hooray. I don't have to tell you to down your drinks and come. Please do come in, there's plenty of room. If someone does need a seat, please do ask a member of staff over there and we can, I'm sure we can arrange that. My name, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Anthony Spire, I'm the director of MK Gallery. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I absolutely love this exhibition. I'm totally thrilled that we're launching it this evening. And I'm allowed to say that I love it because I think it's the first exhibition pretty much in 20 that I haven't curated here. So I've got a distance that allows me to really enjoy it like a visitor. Just quickly to introduce the curators. Kate Bush curated the exhibition, and I think we were incredibly lucky, and I did swoop opportunistically. Kate was between jobs, so we were incredibly lucky to be able to pick her out and convince her to work with us. We've known each other for quite a long time, but even just over lunch yesterday, Kate reminded us how she actually played quite a major role in launching the careers of some artists who are today very well recognised. Claude Cahoon is one of the artists you mentioned, and Tasta Dean was the other. Two artists who you organised exhibitions with when you were director, or one of the directors of exhibitions at the ICA in London in the early 90s. And then Kate, most recently, was director of exhibitions at the Barbican Galleries and did a whole string of superb exhibitions. Some of the best exhibitions, I say this without shame, some of the best exhibitions that I've seen, I think, particularly in the face of history, an extraordinary group exhibition of photography. Kate was recently appointed, and I probably won't get the title right because it's really long, but it's head of photography at the National Media Museum.
The National Media Museum and the National Photography Collection.
Sorry.
Media Space, which are new photography galleries at the Science Museum in London. I do urge you shamelessly doing some self-promotion. Please come and see these new spaces they've just launched.
So I'm really thrilled that Anne, me and Kate are here and can share a few insights into the exhibition, and it might last sort of 25 minutes, half an hour or so. There are opportunities for questions, of course, as well. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and thank you so much for this invitation to make a photography exhibition at Milton Keynes Gallery. It was a really pleasurable and good experience. And when Anthony said, you've got a carte blanche to work with anyone you want, the person at the top of my list was Anne Millet. I really, really think that her work is fantastic, and she's indubitably one of the world's most important mid-career photographers. Can you hear it?
Hello?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, so very, very happy that Anne Millet agreed to accept this invitation to work with us and show at Milton Keynes Gallery. And I must say, without sounding over-flattering and sycophantic, I must say this is an amazing honour to be debuting in this exhibition, this amazing series that you can see in this room, which is called Events Ashore, and this is where we thought we would start our discussion. This is the biggest showing of Events Ashore to date, and it's a series that Anne has been working on for nearly 10 years. It concluded this year. There is a fantastic book that is just coming from Aperture, and we have the first copies here in the bookshop. So I'd really urge you to look at that book, and I'd encourage you to buy it. It's amazing. It will win many awards. The series is comprised of over 100 photographs, so even though this is a lovely, spacious gallery, we're only showing 16 works in this gallery of this particular series. But just to quickly just give you a sense of the structure of the show, Anne and I are not going. Is this worse, or is it coming out? To go right, I haven't got the gist. Just to give you a quick sense of the structure of the show, in case you haven't had time to read the gallery guide, because we're not going to just repeat what's in the gallery guide, but there are 4 major series of work in this exhibition, and in a way, the show is structured around two returns to Vietnam. First body of work in the middle gallery is a series that Anne started in 1994, which was the moment that Vietnam restored diplomatic relations with America, and that was the first time that Ami was able to return to her homeland since her family had been evacuated from Saigon when it fell to the communists of North and South in 1975. So I think Ami will talk more about her kind of personal history in relation to the thinking behind her work. But so Vietnam next door is Anh My's return to Vietnam, and then we finish in this gallery with the photograph at the end over there, which marks the moment in 2011 when the American Navy returned for the first time to Vietnam to engage in exchange military activities with the Vietnamese People's Navy. So there's a kind of moment of personal history next door that comes through a whole cycle that relates to world history in this exhibition. Enough of me, and I want to ask Ami a series of questions, and we are going to try and be quite spontaneous and improvised, and really want to encourage you, if anyone wants to chip in or ask Ami anything, please just wave your hand and we will take your questions at the same time. So the first thing I wanted to ask Ami is, many photojournalists have made photographs of the military across all nations, across all times. This body of work reflects Ami's very close engagement with the American Navy over this 9-year period. And I wonder whether she can kind of characterize to us what she feels the difference is between an artist dealing with a subject like this and, say, a photojournalist, what the key differences are between those two practices.
Before I answer the question, I just wanted to thank Kate and Anthony for this really wonderful opportunity. Well, I think one of the first differences is that these pictures are really not frontline news. A photojournalist would not be photographing any of this. I mean, I have to admit that this picture was actually made in Haiti a week after the earthquake. But I think most photojournalists would have photographed the broken down houses, and I actually did make a few pictures, but deliberately chose not to show them. So I think one of the main differences is that I don't look at the main event. I'm always looking at something that's secondary or something that's more indirect. Something else that I have done is that I've spent 10 years on this project. I don't think you would find a photojournalist being so obsessed about something and spending 10 years on the work. And I do think photojournalistic work is extremely important. I think I'm trying to do something different in the sense that I think my work and the way I see things has been very colored by my personal experience. I mean, it is something from which I start the work and something that sort of gives me the impetus to go and explore and build on this work. And it is very different from somebody who is trying to cover conflict or is trying to unearth a truth or bear witness to something.
Thank you. You were telling me on the train coming down that you had, on occasion, photographs from this series had been sent to the New York Times magazine, but they always rejected them, even though they're such extraordinary images. And I guess that's probably reflective of what you're saying, that although the series as a whole adds up to this kind of epic exploration of American military activity and by extension kind of world politics over a period of 10 years. It's the sort of question of desire for the media to have, an instant, decisive moment type image in a newspaper, whereas your images, to me, make you really slow down and look. And perhaps you could talk a little bit also about this relationship. This is the first time you've worked in color photography. Your work up to this point, both in film and photography, has been in black and white. And I think you've said some very interesting things about the kind of metaphoric issues about, as a photographer, choosing between black and white and color, and about the question of time in photography. I wondered if you could expand on those ideas.
Well, the original impetus for making this work in color was absolutely technical. I always try to reconsider my tools before I start a new project. And I was certain that I wanted to continue with this big camera. And then it became clear that I needed to switch to color when I started photographing the ships at sea. You know, all the ships are camouflaged. They are this kind of blue-gray, and they are at sea. And when it's really sunny, the metal turns a little pinkish and warmer. And when it's really overcast, the metal is colder, blue-gray. And I knew that, and I saw in the first sheets of film that I made in black and white, that the black and white film could only capture the change in tonality, but it could not capture the change in warmth in tones. And I felt that it was essential to switch to color. And as I started working in color, it also became clear that this is a body of work. It's about things that are actually unfolding in the present time. And it has nothing to do with the past. And of course, it's influenced by my past and the past of the US military. But it's unfolding in the present time. And all the other bodies of work had something to do with the past, with working, training for the future, or trying to reenact something that happened in the past.
Thank you. And you know, sort of continuing the idea about the difference between photojournalism and art photography, and as expressed in your work, you know, I think what I take so often from your work is the fact that you stand back from the subject in front of you, and you're able to make these pictures that look so effortless, so sort of clear and straightforward, and yet what you're posing to us as the questions that they pose is quite complicated. So, for example, in the picture behind Anthony up there, you know, you're on the flight deck as planes are landing on these massive, massive aircraft carriers. It's the most dangerous place on Earth to work, I think you said. So it's incredibly noisy and chaotic, and yet, you know, it seems it's almost an image of calm. And I think I love the way that you're able to create this sense of standing back and looking at something in a very kind of non-judgmental way. You know, you give that subject matter great nuance, and I think that was something you also talking about, the difference with a journalist who would have a very clear point of view. So perhaps, you know, sorry, this is a very meandering question, but I wanted to ask you, you know, on a very personal level, what you want to say to us in this series. You know, what is your message about America, about American military, and about American presence in the globe?
It's a long question. Well, my original impetus for making this work was that I really wanted to see what the military looks like at close. You know, I worked with the troops and I've worked with the Marines, but I wanted to see what this machinery looks like. And I chose the Navy, not the Army or the Air Force, because I consider myself a landscape photographer. And so I had worked in the desert with the Marines training in 29 Palms, and I thought, why not the ocean? And I had been invited on one of those ships. So that was my desire to travel with the Navy. So I wanted to know what it was like to be on an aircraft carrier. I wanted to know what it was like to go on a submarine. I wanted to know what it was like to go to Iraq. I was not interested in being in the front line combat, but I wanted to know how everything worked, and I wanted to know what it was like for a woman to be on a ship. And that was my original desire for following the Navy. As an obligation as a photographer, I feel that I needed to translate that experience into these pictures that are very specific in a way, that are detailed, that are full of information, that somehow provide an experience to the viewer. And that's the reason why you have these large prints and they're so sharp, and I use a crazy camera to make them. So that physical experience is very important for me. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily the experience, but it's the experience I want to provide to you as a viewer. And I'm hoping that with that experience comes a kind of grappling with wanting to understand more about the subject matter. So by having that experience, you would start asking questions, and you would start wanting to know more about the subject matter. And I think that is the whole point of the project. And the pictures are kind of ambiguous at times. You don't really know what to think, but that is the whole point. Is this, how do women do, or what about the nun and the soldier? What is it all about? You have someone who represents a kind of institution which is at polar opposite to the other institution, which is the military. They both have uniforms, they both have shaved heads. And so, those are the things I wanted to make you think about in terms of war and peace, and how at polar opposites they are, but at the same time how close they are.
Do you think, because it would be very easy for you as, a Vietnamese American artist to, given, the experiences that you had as a young woman and the experiences that your family lived through in Vietnam, to have a sort of very obvious kind of antipathy towards, towards this military machine that is very dominant in the globe. But you've been very careful to kind of, as you say, to sort of not make over-obvious images. So you're telling us about the kind of humanitarian missions that America engages in around the world. But at the same time, it appears to be a playful image, but of course it's also about the transactions that happen and the influence through arms sales and so on. I'm slightly wandering off my point. My question to you
is whether I have a very simple view of the military, or perhaps...
I think it's about, I think my question to you is to ask what you feel ultimately, whether it's a process of sort of self-discovery for you, as well as telling us something about something real. I don't know how quite how to frame it.
It's definitely a process of self-discovery, and certainly some kind of exorcism. And I don't think I ever quite understand what the military represented for me, because the war was just so devastating and so horrible. And I remember growing up later as an adolescent in the United States. The idea of the Vietnam War was just so horrific that the opinions was always so polarized, and I think I felt conflicted about it. Of course, I understood and I lived through some of the devastation, but at the same time, I was evacuated by the Americans at the end of the war. And my family is from the North, and they're Catholic, so there was just no way that they would have stayed behind and tried to live under communism. So we wanted to leave, and we were lucky we were evacuated by the Americans. And I think we were provided incredible opportunities, and I certainly would not have been an artist if I had not moved to America. So at the same time, I feel very conflicted. It's this good and evil, the polar aspects that I wanted to explore and understand. And so the work is kind of the middle line. I think sometimes some people get frustrated and they say, well, you should be against the war. The work about Iraq should show how ridiculous the operations are. And in a way, the operations look ridiculous because they look so insignificant within the scale of the landscape. But I think one thing I wanted to make sure was that I did not want to have the work be judgmental about the military personnel, because I think I respect what they do. Some of them signed up for the military for economic reasons, and some, actually do it because they wanted to be in combat forces, and that's perfectly fine. So, it's very nuanced, and I think it's a fine line to sort of thread, and that's what I try to do.
And actually, sort of, somebody who's been a provocative critic of your work kind of made the point that they feel that this fascination with the subject that you've had for so many years actually is a kind of fetishization of the military. What would you say to that critique?
Well, I mean, if you talk about fetishism, I think you can really go far. This is nothing in terms of fetishizing the military. I think, something is fetishistic for someone, and it may not be fetishistic for someone else. I mean, as artists, I think we're all obsessed about something, and I think it's what you make out of it. And I think I was fascinated more than I fetishized. And I don't think it's fetishism because of how open the work is. You know, I think fetishism would really focus not just intellectually on something, but I think physically too. You know, you wouldn't have these wide-angle pictures of things. You would focus on a gun. You would focus on a uniform. You wouldn't want to have a relationship between human endeavors and landscape. So I think it's too wide open to be fetishistic. But it's definitely something I'd like to explore head on next.
Tell us a little bit about the work in the next room, the Small Wars series,
Yes.
which I think for those of you who haven't had time yet to read the gallery text might at first sight look like very documentary photographs, but in fact, of course, what's happening in that series is you are basically hanging out with groups of American amateur Vietnamese war reenactors who are every summer kind of rehearsing episodes from the Vietnam War in the forests of North Carolina. And you, on a couple of occasions, actually come out from behind your camera and are kind of co-opted into playing a part in their fantasy battles. So in one picture, you're a Viet Cong sniper, and in another picture, you're a North Vietnamese collaborator. But we have hung that series next to a surprising body of work for people who know your work in photography, a series of drawings called the Zippo drawings. And I wonder whether you could just explain to us what the connections are between those two series for you.
The drawings were made in early 2000, I think just about as I was finishing with the reenactments. And these drawings, I mean, the Zippo lighters are the lighters that American GIs used to carry with them in Vietnam. And it's impossible to find them now. When Vietnam renewed relations with the United States and tourism grew extraordinarily, and I started going back to Vietnam, there was a market for those Zippo lighters, and you would find them in antique shops, and they became expensive. And Vietnamese people are extremely resourceful, so there was suddenly a cottage industry of people in the back alleys making those fake Zippo lighters. Sometimes they came from China, sometimes they were made elsewhere, and then they would be carving and replicate the carvings, and there would be mistakes that would be made grammatically in some of the sayings, and so I started buying some of those, and I found them so fascinating, and so I started reproducing the writings and the drawings. And for me, they relate to the reenactment because there was something, again, about that act of copying, of trying to reenact something, to repeat something, and something that doesn't exist anymore, to try to recapture that past. And in that sense, I think they're very similar.
Thank you. Still. So just to find another question about events ashore. It's another very interesting kind of idea you've raised in relation to this series. You've described it as a road trip, and as many of you will know, as a sort of motif in American culture, in literature and photography, there have been many great works of art that have been based on the idea of the road trip, from Kerouac to Robert Frank's Americans, and new colorist photographers such as Stephen Shaw and Joel Sternfeld. So I wanted to ask Anne-Mie whether she felt that in this body of work she'd been on a road trip, and if so, what did she discover on the road?
With this project, certainly did not start out with the idea in mind of this very ambitious, huge road trip, but it ended up being such a thing. As I started traveling, I found out about more operations. I found out about different places the Navy was in. I found out about classes they taught, about information gathering, about exchanges they did, about the support of science. The Navy supports the McMurdo Station in Antarctica. They also do support research in the Arctic. They also spy on the Russians up in the Arctic with a submarine. So it's so varied. And as I started traveling and wanted to actually go to all the continents in the world and the navies in all the continents, I realized that it was a map for American, I would say, imperialist presence all over the world. So I wanted to complete that trip. And I think as I traveled, I've realized that the military is very insular. It's a small world in itself, but in a way there are so many themes that occur, so many issues that occur in the military as it occurs in American society. Simple things like gender issues, you find that on a ship now that we have women working on the ships. Issues about race. We have African Americans, we have a lot of Latinos on the ships, and there's tensions there, and there's also great friendships and great collaborations. There's issues of economic issues, people join the military for economic reasons, and then also, I think, seeing the way Americans deal with other nations and other cultures, and I think the successes and the blunders that they go through in this big journey. And it was an incredible trip for me, and I was sort of sad to have to stop.
How did you know it was time to stop?
I just couldn't get the energy to really jump through the hoops to get access every time, and I think the idea of packing, everything just became so hard. I just knew that I had lost the momentum, that it was over.
I've got a couple more questions in there, but please interrupt anybody if you're dying to ask Anne-Marie something before we finish those two questions. I wanted to touch on a question about aesthetics. I think, for many people, photography is so gripping in terms of subject matter that we kind of don't necessarily look at it in terms of aesthetics and in the way that we might sort of immediately think of painting and sculpture. And yet, composition and framing and form and balance in photography is just as important as the finer arts. So I wanted to ask you a question about how you find that balance, because I think that's what you do which makes your pictures so great, is the balance between the subject matter in your pictures and the formal expression of that subject. Sorry, rephrase that. Which, when something is unfolding in front of you, like manning the rail, which I think is a fantastic picture over there, the moment that you realize, that that's the moment you take the picture. I mean, because these are not Cartier-Bresson type shooting from the hip, decisive moment pictures. You're working with a large format camera, which is slow. Is there a...
Well, it's really hard to know exactly when you take your picture how good or how complicated it's going to be. But I had a sense that there was something very... that moment had great potential because it had to do with the relationship between these very formal Americans standing on guard and this mess of ship on the horizon. And I think that kind of shimmer, the way the ships look almost fantastical and like a dream, and I think that sense of them coming in contact with another culture and another world, and that tension was what interested me. And of course the subtleties and the way that the horizon is described versus this kind of metallic and very heavy and militarized ship was also something I was going for. So it's always about constructing things and creating tensions, providing information, but sort of like layering it with something else that may oppose an idea you may have. The picture of those guys on the deck of the aircraft carrier. So it's a group of Marines that just finished their physical training. And of course I photographed them running, and I photographed them doing push-ups, and that's what you would see perhaps in a magazine article. But I chose this one because they're cold and they're huddled, and it's the opposite of what you think of in terms of Marine Corps. I mean, Marine Corps, they are the toughest guys, you know. That's who you sent frontline into a conflict before, and it's up to them to stabilize the situation, and then you send in the army. And then you hear, and the ship is tilted, and I think that just reinforces the sense of them being human and so vulnerable. And I love the scale, and that's something I play with a lot, is the sense of scale. So they're sort of a bit more lost on this huge deck with a tilted horizon.
Thank you. And then possibly a related question, but you know, I think that in the sort of wake of photographers like Eggleston and Nan Golden, who've sort of pioneered this language of very spontaneous and improvisatory type compositions, kind of snapshot style image making, on the one hand as a tradition in photography, and then on the other hand the fact that, you know, in this digital age, there's a sense that anyone can pick up a camera and make a picture. And one of the things I admire about your work is the way that you're so completely, you know, a master of the actual medium and the technology of photography. The skill in your work is very clear, but it's very understated. It doesn't dominate the image in the way that perhaps with someone I find like Ansel Adams or someone, the technique becomes the main thing. So another very rambling question, but I suppose my question is a wider one about photography. You know, do you think photographers have still eternally got to navigate between this sort of peculiar identity of the medium, that it's a technology, so it's ever evolving. The technology evolves in the way that, you know, painting hasn't. It's stopped in 16th century Venice. And that sometimes gets in the way of people seeing it as an artistic form. Is it a problem, do you think, or is it an opportunity?
I think it's something that photographers always have to fight against, you know, is it artwork or not? And I think Kate's first question is, are you a journalist or are you an artist? So I think it's something that photographers fight. And some photographers, you know, want to have an artistic hand, and whether it's by setting up and making something very dramatic, or by tinting a photograph, or by doing abstract, I don't know. I think I like fighting this battle with a clear picture that's straightforward, and I think it's also important to have a series of work. You know, it's about a body of work. It's not necessarily about one single photograph that will just sort of express something about your ideas. So I think the body of work will really make a difference. I think the use of the camera is interesting to me. I was very inspired by Roger Fenton's work. You know, there's something very deliberate about using a large format view camera and putting the dark cloth and having to work with plates. And I certainly don't fetishize that camera, even though it has served me extremely well on this ship. You wouldn't believe how much it's helped me to be seen with a wooden camera and looking like somebody coming out of the 19th century, and suddenly everyone feels sorry for you and they say, okay, can I carry your bags, or you want to take a picture? It's taking 15 minutes, but that's okay. You have a 19th century camera. But I think there's something very deliberate about the use of the camera, and it may feel a little more formal, but I think that aspect of it, for someone who is interested, it forces you to just slow down and really spend the time and think about what it's about. And it's important these days when you have Facebook and Instagram, and people are bombarded with pictures, and the pictures are easily digestible. And I think these just are a little more, perhaps more slippery, but I think more complicated. And if you stay with it, I think, in a way, in the end, more satisfying.
Couldn't agree more. On that note, can I open this discussion up to the audience?
Thank you. I'm Sean, I'm a photographer. Not quite sure where to start with all of those questions, but the question I want to ask based on the last two is, because you're approaching the photography, which is it's quite spontaneous, it's quite reportage in its feel, with quite a a historic system and a process that takes time, to what can you...
I actually have a hard time understanding with the microphone. Can you speak without?
I'll do it without, it's much easier. The style of the imagery, except with a couple, is very fly on the wall. It's as if you're looking at a scene taking place naturally, but you're using a technology and a system which is quite slow and deliberate and obvious to the people that you're photographing. To what degree do you feel reality is compromised by the fact that you're quite obvious in the fact you're taking a picture?
Completely compromised. You know, I mean, photography is fiction. I mean, we all know that. So it's completely compromised. And because it's so slow, I actually have to ask people to do it again or hold it. And I have no issue with it. And it's actually, it's a kind of reenactment. And it's actually really interesting. And I did not answer that. I did not speak about this one.
You just take it as you see it, don't you?
Yeah, I take it as I see it, but to make that stay long enough for me to take the picture, I have to work hard, because it takes 5-10 minutes to set the camera up.
But you take it as you see it, you see it there and then, you take it.
Yeah, but I have to say, don't move, because I have to set my camera, and I have to get my film, I have to measure the light, but it has to do with reenactment and journalism, and Kate asked this question earlier. I was on this icebreaker, and it was a Coast Guard, so the military supporting scientists doing research in the Arctic on global warming and other things. And there were these great guys who were working on a project where they were tagging sea lions. And they would get on a helicopter in the morning and fly really far and tag the sea lions so that they could study their migration patterns and their feeding patterns. They would go so far that I begged them, they can't take an extra passenger because it means that they take less fuel. So they kept saying, well, maybe one day when we don't go so far, we'll take you. And I was on the icebreaker for 3 weeks, and a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, and I start getting really nervous. Every day at lunch, I don't want to be too obvious. So finally I said, look, are you going to take me? And they said, I don't think it's going to happen. So I said, well, what about we just go off the ship the next time the ship docks on the ice, and you guys go out there and put on your suit, and we'll just take the picture there. I was desperate. And they said, okay. And 2 days before that, crews from ABC News came on the ship. There was a lady from NPR, which is the national public radio, who had been on the ship for a week. They have very high standards. And so the appointed day, they get dressed, and they put on all this stuff, and it's white, and they blend into the ice, and they have their bows and arrows, and we go out there. And throwing my camera, I didn't have an assistant. And before I knew, all the guys from ABC ran out, because that was like the greatest opportunity. And they ran out, and they just set up their big cameras, and they stood in front of me. And I started protesting, and I just made this big stink, and I just screamed. I said, well, I don't care what you guys do, but let me take my picture first. And then I guess the lady from NPR then saw this commotion, and she ran down, and she said, I think this is outrageous that you guys are taking pictures of a reenactment. And she just went on and on and on about it. And I just like, what is she talking about? And then she came up to me and she said, but it's okay for you. I'm talking about that. So it's the idea of, the freedom that as artists you could do anything, and it doesn't matter, but
And Roger Fenton started that, didn't he? With the famous Shadow in the Valley of Death, when they famously rearranged the cannonballs after the grenade.
I don't know whether you want that or not.
Do I? So it seems to me that the pictures really embody a very intellectual style of science fiction, like J.G. Ballard or Philip Dick. Is that something important to you? I mean, you said photography is fiction.
It is, of course, I love his work, and I'm very interested in storytelling, I'm interested in fiction, so, photography is fiction in that, it's photographing something that is happening, but why do you think it's the truth? Because I have my hand in doing something, in setting something up, and for example, TMZ would photograph two movie stars coming out of the theater, and the angle from which you're taking it makes it seem like they are almost kissing. But they're not, it's just the angle. That's what I'm saying. But yes, there's a sense of
Well, so much of it seems preposterous. The guy in the gas mask, you're standing just behind the guy pointing the
yes,
rifle.
but I wanted that. You know, he has 3 legs, so that idea of biological warfare, the idea, yes, it is science fiction, so where's the world going? But
it's also real.
Yeah, it's also real.
It's
Yes.
real as a scene.
So, but I think the idea of who's in charge also is something that I want to ask. You know, he's following directions and he's training for that kind of biological warfare, but you wonder where it's really all going in some kind of catastrophic state. So yes, J.T.
Anyone else? Don't be shy.
Just following that line up about fiction and the way you construct things, I wonder if there's any tension between the nuanced images and the bodies of work and the curation of it, in the sense that you're representing that fiction. Is there something else happening on top of the work that brings it into space?
The problem with exhibitions is, an exhibition's photography is, you know, I think photography is such a marvelous and serial medium, as Anthony says, it's, you know, it's a body, it's always a body of work. And, yeah, I think particularly Annie's project, you know, it's a lifelong project. It creates, doesn't it? Each series is distinct and has its own identity, its own, you know, thinking and its own formal expression, but it all sort of relates to each other in different ways. I think riffs off each other in different ways, but are we creating another fiction? I don't know. Selections are really fiction, maybe.
Yeah, I think you do change the fiction depending on what you edit out and what you show. Absolutely. I think it depends on who's looking at it too. But in terms of creating different layers, in terms of the various projects, you know, the 3 black and white projects were not planned together. You know, I made the Vietnam pictures first, and then I moved on to the reenactors, and then the war happened, and then I did the trainings. It was never planned as a trilogy, but as a trilogy, it works marvelously. The way they bounce off each other and kind of all come together as this, you know, this as something else, and so in that sense,
And in a way, 29 Palms became the trigger for the beginning of this series, didn't it? Just because you were invited onto a
yeah.
So, thank you for your question.
A very naive question. Is part of the curator's job to select from a much larger body of work? Or is the artist decide which things will be displayed?
It totally depends. I think it depends on the curator and it depends on the artist. In this case, I'd say it was a really enjoyable collaboration. That's how I said it. A collaboration.
Probably large.
In this case, well, I mean, it's artistic because Vietnam we're showing every picture in the series. So Annie is very precise about the selection of her own work. So in some cases we're showing the series. In this room, if you get a chance to look at the book, obviously this was a real exercise in editing, and you know, we went back and forwards a few times, and I made a selection, and Annie improved it. And
I think Kate made the main selection, and I basically said, well, I think I'd like to include, you know, a couple more pictures, but I think Kate made the selection. She tried to choose, we tried to choose something from every types. You know, to put this book together was very difficult for me, and I started out by breaking down the types of pictures, you know, whether it's hardware, you know, that's what I called, or training, or portraits, or seascapes, and I would break it down. And so I think Kate looked through, and she looked at what was interesting to her, and she tried to cover the various types of pictures, or interactions between an American and someone from a different culture.
yeah, so you were in order to get a sense, because of course the other thing that's incredible about this body of work is, you know, it's a decade, but of course it's sort of indistinguishable which pictures are from 2005 and which pictures are from 2014, because Andy's vision is so kind of continuous and so consistent. So I knew, I wanted to get a sense of the variety of events, the events ashore that inform life at sea. So this was one of the earliest pictures in 2005 in the Arabian Gulf during the Iraq War. Which is the latest picture?
The latest is actually the guy with the gas mask.
Oh, the guy
that
with
was
the gas
done
mask,
a few
yeah.
months ago.
So, we needed, it would have been impossible to replicate the book, because we would have needed the gallery sort of 10 times bigger. So it was quite difficult to produce, but needed to get across the sense of the breadth of time as well as the breadth of geography, because a major facet of this series is that Andy's been to every continent practically, all continents with the American paper. So we needed to try and do that in 16 pictures.
I think we should probably wrap it up there. I mean, Kate and Annie is still here for the evening. Just let them get to the bar before. Thank you very much. It is a huge privilege for us here at the gallery to be showing Andy's work, and Andy will be in an exhibition at Tate Modern that begins at the end of November, I believe, and it's related to memory, war and time. Is that right? Conflict time. So make sure you do or go and see that. I also want to thank a few other people, if I may, very quickly, all of my colleagues here at the gallery, as ever. Thank you very much, particularly Claire Corrin, the exhibition's organiser. I can't see her. But thank you very much, and the technical team as ever for your expertise, professionalism, some partners for the exhibitions, Maz in Antwerp, thank you very much, it was a great partnership. The exhibition will also be travelling to the Hasselblad Foundation in Gothenburg, opening in February, if anyone fancies the trip. Murray Guy in New York were very important partners and supporters of this exhibition. Aperture have published the book of this series. It's available for sale at the information desk. It is a sensational book. I really recommend you have a close look at it. We have also just received a couple of other books that we've published. One of James Welling, you might remember his exhibition here last year, and Peter Dreyer. So a lot of new publications, hot off the press. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you very much again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Nice evening.